an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Traitor Queen, Chapters 2, 3, and 4, Summoned, Questions, and Preparations. In these chapters, Lillia successfully treats Gull's wound, and I was actually kind of weirdly proud of her. And Lorkin gets thrown in a Sachakan prison. I didn't see that coming. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. So I was pretty hard on the ending of the last book. I, again, feel pretty good about the start of this book. We shall see how this progresses. I really hope that because the author's back is up against a wall and she doesn't have a whole trilogy stretching out before her or even another book and a half, she is going to be forced to really pull it out at this point with this book. So this starts off, the chapter 2, Summoned, begins with Lorkin being summoned to the King of Sachaka's throne room to talk publicly about what he has experienced and essentially to give them information about the traitors. But the thing is that I thought, and I was mistaken, this is something that I constantly have to keep in mind also, just like in life as well. I thought that the Sachakans were going to be kind of up against a wall if Lorkin decided not to share information, and that publicly they weren't going to be able to take measures against him for the refusal, and that whatever they decided to do was going to have to be behind closed doors, and much more a subterfuge, perhaps a blackmail, I don't know. But instead, the king is straight up like, oh, yeah, no, you're going into prison until we decide what the fuck to do with you. And I really feel like this is one of those moments where, like I said, I have to keep this in mind in general. So many of us who were raised in a household where following the rules was rewarded, where it was drilled into you what's right and wrong, where you are surrounded by other people who operate by the same sort of code of ethics. Those types of people really believe in the inherent power of rules and regulations. And I am one of them. I have said before on other shows, I have an inherent respect for authority, despite the fact that I constantly question it. I still do as I am bid by people that I believe know more than me. And I follow the signage on things. I read the instruction manual for stuff I buy. I go out and look for, people who are experts in their field to seek their opinion on an article, on a method of doing something. That is how I work. And it's always a shock to me to realize that there are people out there living their lives and not taking the advice of what I see as in some subjects, their superiors, seriously. And it's one thing to simply disregard advice because you don't really believe that they know as well as you. Maybe you think your circumstances are different or special or whatever. It is another thing to come to the realization that some people do, that if you decide to do whatever the fuck you want, who's going to stop you? And that is, I think, where the difference lies between those who oftentimes wind up with power and those who seek power is that you have two different schools of thought. One of those schools of thought is, oh, hi, Martin's in the chat. One of those schools of thought is, I am part of a system that is functioning as pieces all working together. And I am not going to do anything to disrupt the system because I respect how it all works and moves together. And then there are people who say, thank you for the power, but the system doesn't interest me. I'm going to go do what I feel like. And everybody who thought that we had all agreed we're going to put the system first stands there and watches that person walk away and goes, wait, but can we just do this? Somebody stop them. What are they doing? And as it turns out, and we have seen this especially in our administration currently in the United States, when the question gets asked, who's going to stop them? The answer turns out to be nobody. Because everyone is waiting for someone else to do something. Everybody is attempting to stop a person from taking power and running amok by using the channels, the proper channels in quotes, to stop someone who has absolutely no respect for those channels and will not listen to anything sourced from those channels anyway. So what I'm saying is, when Lorkin goes into this meeting with the Sachakin king, I'm thinking the king is aware that he has to keep up a facade of conciliatory goodwill, of working with the Karelians, of keeping up this alliance or the attempt at an alliance. And I underestimated how much they were just going to be willing to do whatever the fuck. Because as is pointed out by Achati later to Daniel, they don't need Karelia. They don't fear Karelia. Karelia was simply an interesting opportunity that they were willing to explore. As far as they're concerned, yeah, we'll fuck this right up. We're not getting anything out of this in particular. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. I feel like I should have known. Sachaka in the past has been real fucking sketchy about shit, you know? Like, when we had the Achani invasion, the king knew what was going on and basically was like, well, I'll see how you do. If you do well, then, all right, come and talk to me. If you don't, I have nothing to do with it. They have proven over and over again, the only thing they respect is power. That's it. And really, unfortunately, when it comes down to it, a lot of people are like that. And they only recognize one type of power. It's a very narrow view. So the fact that Lorkin comes in, tells the king, yeah, see, no, I'm not gonna tell you anything at all. And the king even tries to sort of work through Daniel and is like, hey, get in touch using that blood ring that I know you have, I guess. Get in touch with the head of your guild and ask him to make Lorkin submit to mind reading. He tries to sort of do things within the rules, even though it's still going to be against this guy's will. But that doesn't work either. Osen is like, nah, dude, tell him no. And Daniel sort of expects that to be the case, that they're going to tell the king no. But I think Daniel sort of thought what I did, which was, if you tell the king no, he's going to be really pissed. And you're going to have to watch your back because people are going to be moving and shaking behind the scenes. But I do not think Daniel was at all prepared for the fact that the king was basically like, oh, no? Well, then you can just go to jail. I'm not letting you go. I don't know what you know. I don't know what kind of a risk that can be to my people. No, absolutely not. And when you really stop and think about the position that the king of Sachaka is in, it makes sense, his stance on this. You know, as far as he is concerned, there is a group of essentially like outlaw people. He has almost no information on them. He knows they're out there. He knows they're ruled by women. He knows that there are people who pretend to be regular Sachakan slaves that are from that group. But there's, other than that, really nothing to go on to tell who is who. And as far as he can tell, they could be aiming to take things a lot further. They could be aiming to take over. And granted, I would prefer that because Sachaka sucks. And it's just a misogynist, like, what do you even call a society that has slavery? Because fascism is a whole other thing. I don't even know what you call it. Is there a word for a slaveholding system where this is just like part of how the economy functions, is just slave labor? But regardless, you know, personally, the Sachakan king can suck 1,000 dicks. I don't want him to succeed at things. But if I think of things from his point of view, deciding not to let this fucking random Karelian out of my country without getting every bit of information out of him that I can, an opportunity that I believe with good reason will never come again. When's the next time that I'm going to have a regular person at my disposal who I can read information off of? I mean, I get it, you know, I really get why he's handling it this way. And I even sort of respect the fact that he isn't using back channels and being like, oh yeah, I'm going to pretend everything is fine, and then I'm going to like kidnap you in your sleep. There's something a little bit more honest about in front of everybody being like, well, you're going to jail. What can I say? Go to prison. Ashleigh's here. Hi, Ashleigh. So we're talking about Lorkin being thrown in jail by the Sachakan king for refusing to allow a mind read. Now, what I find interesting is that Lorkin has that implanted stone that keeps the mind read from being successful should he want to prevent it. So he doesn't actually, like, if they were to force a mind read, it would not actually betray any information. However, as he says to Daniel, he hasn't had the time to practice with this stone. So while the traitors who are trained can let someone mind reading them see whatever they want them to see, sort of, I believe it's described in the previous book as they fill in the blanks that the person reading their mind expects to see. They are able to create a false narrative that feels so real and believable that to people who don't know you can mess with it, it's just a foregone conclusion that's what happened. Lorkin, though, doesn't have the training to create that narrative when somebody reads his mind. So when he is talking to Daniel and Daniel's like, can't you just use that to not let them do it? He's like, oh, they wouldn't get anything out of me, but they would sense that I was keeping them from doing it, which that is a really dangerous prospect, that they get any sort of inkling that you can control what somebody sees. What the king claims he's going to do, and I'm going to jump ahead so that I can sort of read this direct quote. There's so much in here about Daniel and Ashaki Achadi, because Daniel is still sort of like lusting after this dude. And honestly, I was like low-key interested in the two of them hooking up last book, but after the way things have gone, I'm kind of feeling Tyann's side of things. So Daniel, like, being irritated at Tyann and kind of continuing to want to hook up with Achadi, I'm, at this point, just frustrated with him. I kind of feel about it the way I did with Lillia and Naki, where I'm just like, dude, that man, like, look, he might not just be an evil dude like Naki was, but the guy is part of a system you want nothing to do with. Just don't do it, man. You know, like, this is like, you know, when you're on a dating site and somebody says that they're a Trump supporter, just click out of that profile. Don't do it. Look, I stand by that, you know? So anyway, they head in and, let's see. Oh, right. So there are 50 people here, the Ashaki, watching this whole procession. And when the king questions Lorkin, he gives very general answers. Tries to say that the information that he got was simply like herbal healing medicines, things like that. The king asks how many people there were. Lorkin says more than 100 in this, like, again, very vague way. And we know it's like much more significant even than that, I believe. And Lorkin says, I can't tell you numbers, their strength, or how well trained they are. And finally, he says, will you consent to a mind read? And Lorkin says, no. And the king says, I will enlist only my most skilled mind reader. He will not search your thoughts, but will allow you to present your memories to him. I wish so much that Lorkin was able to prepare more for something like that. I don't know how much I believe that a mind reader wouldn't rifle through his thoughts. And I don't know what kind of measures one could take to prevent something like that. Like, if he's mind reading, that requires skin-to-skin contact, if I'm not mistaken. Like, you have to actually touch a person. Could you just break physical contact and stop them? I don't really, like, I'm just kind of curious, because I feel like if Lorkin could have just come up with some safe and vivid memories, he might be able to give them enough to make it seem as if he were cooperating. But, and that's like outside of just using the stone to prevent them from reading his mind. That's like a kind of discipline where he has other things that are more important locked behind the doors, the way that we've sort of seen in when, for example, Sonia learns how to protect things within her mind when she's training with Rothan. Which, this is when I said in the last episode how much I miss getting to see magic. When I thought of that scene while reading this, I really realized how much I miss her writing about things like that. We just don't, I mean, I would have loved to see what Naki's initial mind read with Sonia looked like. We don't actually get a look at it firsthand. We just hear Sonia tell us about it afterward. This is what I'm sorry I keep hammering on this, and I'm sorry, Ashleigh, ahead of time. But this is what I find so frustrating about this author in these two books, is that she keeps coming up with interesting ideas that I feel like have all of this potential to write a rich scene that's really fascinating. And instead, she just has a character report to us secondhand what they saw. It's not the same. And being in Sonia's head and seeing the way that somebody, like we've seen before, for example, how when you go into somebody's mind, the way that the place looks around you is different and sort of betrays who they are as a person, you know, how they present themselves. Sonia, I believe the room that Rothan steps into, it like looks like the house that she lived in with her aunt and uncle, if I'm not mistaken, where things were like sort of stable. And I wonder if it still looks like that, or now if it's changed because she's grown and she's lived at the guild for a long time, and maybe it's different. I would have loved to see Naki's room, and what does her space look like? And what did the specifics of the scene that she showed Sania look like? Because I would love to see her trying to portray somebody like Lillia as like a cold-blooded murderer. Did she have Lillia with like a scowl on her face, like all threatening? Like, what did she show her? I'm sorry, guys, you're in the chat. Martin says, on the flip side, would the Allied lands throw away the arrangement for the sake of one guy? I don't know. Martin, it's hard for me to say because Curalia is really... I feel like they operate with a lot more fear than I expect a lot of the time, rather than being willing to try new things or experiment. And I think it would all have to do with what they found out about Lorkin's black magic usage and the fact that he has learned it, where Sania was at the time, and what kind of reaction they think she would have, because they're clearly worried about Sania. And if she shortly is not even going to be there, they could ostensibly just kind of sacrifice Lorkin and then lock her out, which I don't think they would do, but, you know, maybe. I think it all really depends on where the chips fell when they heard about what was going on here. I don't know. Ashley says you could break physical contact, but as info can be transferred instantly, it may not be quick enough to prevent any damage. It's true. Yeah, that's, I think, another thing is like, because of the way it's told, I have an idea of this like slow, methodical search through someone's mind that takes actual time. But I'm forgetting this is happening at the speed of thought, literally, so it might not be that simple. Ashley says, don't apologize. We're pretty much on the same wavelength, I think. Okay. Yeah, Ashley, I don't know if you like went back and watched the previous episode because I haven't gotten a chance to post it yet to the iTunes feed, but I was really hard on it. And this is just another example of just her. There's another moment too later on where I just get reminded of cool shit that she did in the first books that I'm like now thinking back on, like, why haven't we seen that again, man? That's so like interesting. She says, yeah, I did completely agree with you there as well. The author's choices are just weird. Yeah. And it's like, it almost feels like she wrote like there's part of me that wonders if that author wrote this series the way that she wrote the first series, or did she ghostwrite this and somebody else just decided that, like, she, you know, came up with the outline and somebody else filled in the blanks and didn't really do too much with those parts of it because they weren't specified particularly. It just, the feel of these books is different. It's the same characters, same setting. It's all in appearance the same, but the tone to it and the way that I'm engaged with it doesn't feel the same at all. And I just don't know what other explanation there is other than maybe she banged these out really quick, wasn't really that invested, and maybe had like was on deadline and promised that she would have them done by a certain time and just decided to like get the bare minimum done to get it to publishing. But I hate to think that because that's so rote, you know, and it's such a shame for an author to take an opportunity to write cool stuff as like, oh, I just have to get this done. Which, as much as I hate that idea, that is kind of what it feels like when you read it. That she's just giving you what you need to piece the story together, and that's all. There's not really a lot of spirit behind it, you know? Anyway, getting distracted by this, but yeah, so Osen, because Daniel is still touching the ring when Lorkin gets gripped up, Osen tells Daniel, just let them take him. Because Daniel's about to try and like start some shit. And Osen just says, we're going to figure out everything we can do from here. But there isn't a whole lot with the positioning that we are in at the moment We don't have any leverage. So he'll be okay. They're not going to torture him or anything yet. But trust that we're working on stuff from our end. And then we go to Sania. And she gets woken up by Osen. Or no, first she gets woken up by Callan, who apparently comes to her rooms every morning to escort Lillia to her classes. Callan I have a really difficult time understanding Callan as a character. I feel like I'm being told that he's rigid in his rule following, but he also takes Rowett. It's such a contradiction to me. And Rowett is legal, so it's not like that's out of the question. And that's not to say that people who are a rigid rule follower don't indulge in their own private vices. But I guess I just don't know enough about him to reconcile those two things, really. I feel like that implies that he's definitely a hypocrite of some kind, but I don't even know that. And the thing about somebody who is rigid and doesn't like to deviate from exactly what's expected and allowed is that oftentimes those kinds of people are control freaks. And control freaks don't love substances that put them out of control, like mind-altering substances. That's not always the case. I mean, for me, I have started to really enjoy CBD, which is much, tamer than anything. But because of the fact that I am a control freak, it can be hard for me to relax. So I appreciate the effects of CBD in that it gets me to let go in a way that I don't find myself really able to. Maybe that's the deal with Callan. It's just sort of strange because I whenever somebody describes him as being rigid, the first person that I think of is Stannis Baratheon. I imagine somebody who's sort of gray and pinched and unhappy looking, who is stiff and just unbending, And can you guys picture Stannis Baratheon getting stoned? It just doesn't quite work. So I think that's partially my problem, is that I have the wrong idea of his rigidity in my mind, and I need to sort of figure out another person to compare him to. But I find it really difficult to get a grip on who he is, because I feel like we're being set up to find out Callan is involved with Skellen. And I've said this before. It's been drawn out so much because there's been no forward movement in regards to finding Skellen in the last book at all, that I'm starting to be like, man, if he is tied in with Skellen at this point, there's no surprise left there. It feels really kind of obvious. I don't know. Let's see. Ashleigh says, I don't know. I feel like Stannis is so hypocritical that maybe I could see him doing it. Yeah, I don't really Stannis sucks, but I don't find him to be so much a hypocrite as somebody with blinders on who does whatever he thinks needs doing, which can result in being hypocritical, but it's not for the sake of simply doing what you want. It's more because he's so rigid that he does awful things because he is rigid. And that's not really what this is. Callan doesn't go smoke Rowett because he's forced to smoke Rowett as part of an investigation or God knows what. But, I'm also thinking about the Stannis in the books, because in the show, that Stannis is a monster, and we won't talk about that. So, Ashleigh says he was real quick to go down the bastard Joffrey route, mostly because it was convenient for him. I don't know what you mean by the bastard Joffrey route. But Ashleigh, you can. I'm gonna move forward, but please feel free to give me an example of what you mean. So anyway, Callan comes in. He's here to find Lillia. She isn't in her bed, and it turns out that she is off with Anyi attending to Gaul's injury. So this we get a little bit of magic, but it's told in a really dry way. which is so, again, so strange. At first, all was chaos, but she drew upon what she had been told or read and on exercises designed to make sense of all the signals. The first thing that was obvious was the pain. She nearly gasped aloud as she picked that up and was proud that she did not lose focus. Pain was easy to stop. It was one of the early lessons taught to healers. Once she'd tackled that, she looked for other information. Her mind was drawn toward the damaged part, where essential liquids were being lost and others that were dangerously poisonous were trickling into healthy systems. Drawing magic, she fed it into the rupture so that the edges of the wound knit together, healing faster than they could ever have done without intervention. Do you guys see what I mean? Leighton says the idea that Joffrey was a bastard. If he accepted him as Robert's rightful son, he wouldn't have a claim. Yeah, but he was fucking right, though. Like, it's hard for me to get mad about that. Because he was right. But anyway, the magic is so basic. Like, it's just, she felt pain. She stitched the wound together. There's nothing about, I'm sensing that, like, for example, his body was turbulent with the pounding of a heartbeat and the rushing of fluids and liquids up and down channels of such and such. And she felt this like heat and realized that this was the source of the injury and the pain, and it glowed red or something that was like, that gives you a visual that helps you to see how she's looking at it. Nothing. It's just this very like, she found the wound and stitched it shut. Really? Okay. I guess. I mean, it works, and I'm glad that like she has advanced enough that she could do this for Gaul, because I like Gaul and I don't want him to just die. But also, oh my God, what an opportunity. Nothing is done with it. So finally, she is able to, because it turns out that his gut was nicked by the blade when he was stabbed, which is causing a bit of sepsis, and she has to pull the poison of that out of his system along with the blood. That's like it's all sort of looking for a moment like he's bleeding even more than he was, but that's her purging the system. And then she's able to stitch the exterior wound shut, and he's going to have to recover and like replace the blood, hydrate, rest, that kind of thing. So at this point, they're talking about what they're going to do next. And there's a moment a little bit later, but I'm just going to talk about it now, where Cery's trying to figure out what they should do. They all decide to hide here for the time being. They sleep, and he wakes up in the morning, and Gaul is clearly doing better. And Cery sort of takes it for granted that Gaul is going to be like, all right, let's get out there and fuck some lives up. And instead, Gaul tells Cery, let them think we're dead. And Cery takes that basically as Gaul giving up, and is surprised because he didn't expect Gaul to give up before he himself gave up. And I kind of liked this moment because it was like a combo of Cery asks himself, why did I expect my friend to risk his life for me? I completely took it for granted that he would do that. And the fact that he isn't willing to do that is the more surprising thing. And that makes me kind of shitty, actually. I liked that moment of realization. I also like the fact that, like, in the previous chapter, or the first chapter when I covered in the previous episode, Cery is realizing that both he and Gaul have aged and aren't as fast as they used to be, and just, their reflexes aren't what they were. And I feel like this is a little bit of a betrayal that Gaul also feels that. Like, maybe he knows 2 or 3 years ago he would have been fast enough to stop the stabbing. And now, the fact that he was in fighting form and still got stabbed, he doesn't really want to put himself out there again when he's now injured, even though he's recovering. And it's like, he's well on his way and much better now. Seems to me this is Gull recognizing their weaknesses in a way that we haven't had to in a minute. So yeah, I kind of liked this, and the plan is essentially to continue to hide out in this like really shitty little room. And it's not a situation that Cery relishes. It's not like it can't get things down there smuggled to make it more comfortable, but it's in a very different position than the other places they've hidden out. I'm not thinking they're going to be able to like smuggle bed frames and furniture down here necessarily. I don't know. Maybe they can, but whatever it is, it seems like it's going to be it's going to be trickier, and it's going to take longer to do. And that's just with like making the place sort of more livable. And then there's getting food and whatnot down there. If we're pretending we're dead, they can't be seen at all. It means that they're going to have to rely entirely on either Lillia like providing things for them and being their supplier, or they're going to have to figure out a way to disguise themselves really, really effectively. And I feel like they're just too well known to really get away with that. I don't know. There's also the idea that Callan could help, but I don't really know, like, the whole thing is Cery doesn't really want Sania to know that they're hiding here or that they are in danger the way that they are, because he is of the opinion, and when he like voices this, he can see that Lillia kind of agrees with him. He's of the opinion that Sania, if she hears the danger that they're in, she is either going to get like too involved and potentially be in danger, because things have obviously escalated if they know who his daughter is, or she is going to decide that it's no longer safe for them at all in the city, and she's going to get them out of there. And so he's like, no, we can't tell. I don't want to talk to Callan about where we are specifically, and I don't want Sania to know, because she's going to try and like basically, what's the word? Evacuate us. And it's clear at this point, Cery is pretty much like, this motherfucker has to go down. I cannot just let this stand and be run out of my own city. I've already lost my territory. This is embarrassing. Like, so yeah, we'll see how that goes. So, all right, we go to Lorkin, and he's being led to the prison. The jail isn't too terrible. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I was like, they might just put him in like nice apartments and lock the door, but it is a real jail. Like, he's in a cell. There's no toilet. There's just like a bucket. It's open, and he can see other prisoners, and he can be watched. It's not what I was sort of hoping he was going to get. And he sees somebody being like wheeled away as he's coming in, and the dude looks like he's probably dead. And he reflects on that he was told prisoners rarely stayed more than a few weeks, even if judged guilty. Magicians were too much trouble to keep locked away, and non-magicians were simply sold into slavery. The interrogator hadn't said whether the magicians were freed or executed. That's part of the game, Lorkin thought. Constant hints at dire consequences if I don't cooperate, but no direct threats yet. So they have these interrogators coming in, talking to him, and they are asking him similar questions, threatening him with similar like consequences for his country, potentially, if he doesn't say anything. And this dude comes over, and he is different. This is a different interrogator. And he sits and just watches Lorkin for a while. And Lorkin's like caught up in memories about Tyvara and the traitors and everything. And as he's thinking about this, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where this starts. It's not in this section, actually. It's a little bit later on. Well, I'll just talk about it. this person continues to press him, and it's obvious he is different than the first interrogator. He seems to have more of a patient, relentless approach rather than simply trying to intimidate him or threaten. It's about motivating him and seeing what is a weak spot, what's a pressure point that he can lean on. And the only time that we get so far of him doing something really underhanded is evidently Lorkin hasn't been fed since he was put in here, which I'm surprised that's how we're handling this, but okay. And this dude has some servants bring in food and lets him get a whiff of it. And it's just like, yeah, man, I don't even want to eat this whole pile of fries. Those Big Macs, I mean, I could do maybe like 2. But there's 4 here. I don't need them. You could have them. If you just say something. Just one thing. Look at this Big Mac. Do you smell it? Smell these fries? Look at the salt on them. And I love how Lorkin's like, maybe I can give him just one little nothing piece of information. But I like 2 things about how he reacts. He immediately tells himself, no. And one of the things he thinks is, you get too chatty at all, and they will trip you up. He doesn't totally trust himself, and I think that's really smart. People think they know what's important and not in a conversation. As somebody who tends to be pretty good at lying, it's really hard, you guys. It's part of why I don't really lie anymore, is because it takes a ton of energy to do it. And I just have, as I've gotten older, the payoff isn't good enough. I don't need to lie. I'll deal with the consequences of telling the truth, because lying is just draining. And part of what takes so much energy is keeping things straight in your head, what you said about this and about that. And if you're going to be like attempting to tell some truth, but not the whole truth, that's similar to lying. You have to keep track of the portions you revealed and didn't. And they will absolutely, if they are professional interrogators, know how to trick you or trip you up or imply something and get you to correct them, or take an implication and run with it and read your face to see whether or not you are confirming or denying what they're saying. So Lorkin tells himself, no, I'm not going to give them anything because it's all ammunition potentially. And secondly, Lorkin thinks Tyvara would expect me to have more of a backbone than that. And I like that a lot. The idea of like, let's imagine that Tyvara was here, and this is the first thing they've ever done to really like push me, and I immediately begin to cave. That's embarrassing. I can't let her know that's how I did this. Like, nah, I got to do me proud. And I know that it shouldn't be the way that you operate as a person. It should be something that comes from within. But honestly, when you're struggling how to handle a situation and about doing the right thing, I do find it really motivating to imagine somebody important to you watching you. Imagine later that that person finds out what you did or said, not your version of it. Imagine somebody was filming it and the person that you care about gets to see it. Are you going to be proud of how you handled that? And honestly, that has helped me multiple times in my life, thinking of things that way. And it's part of what has made me more dedicated to like standing up for people as well. There are times where I can feel really afraid to make waves, where I'm in a situation with people who are like, not my friends or my family, and I don't feel like it's my place to say anything. And then I think about, but I really talk a big talk. And if somebody were to see me in this moment and the way that I just did nothing, that would be really like embarrassing. I can't do that. So Ashleigh says, I don't even want to think about how fast I'd crack when it comes to starvation. Even the threat, and I'm like, okay, I'll tell you everything. I'm not exactly Bobby Sands. Martin says, not gonna lie, if I got bribed with food, I'd spill the beans in 10 seconds flat. I appreciate you guys. I really starvation is something that I imagine I would crack right away. And then I'm like, I don't know. I've gone on crazy diets before where I didn't eat any solid food for 10 days. And that was voluntarily. All I drank was a maple syrup lemon pepper drink for 10 straight days with no food. I might be able to withstand some starvation. The thing is about starvation, you get far enough into it, you stop kind of noticing that you're hungry anymore because your body just begins to shut down. But I say that now after being very well fed for many years, and who knows, I might be the same for me. So let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where, Sania's leaving for Sachaka. She'll either want someone else high up in the guild to know we're here, or she'll move us out. Right. And I forgot about the implication too. Telling somebody else about them being there, they don't know who spilled about Anyi being his daughter. So the fact that there is some leak out there they're still not aware of, it's understandable that they just want to keep this as close to the vest as possible. So this is when Daniel is, oh my God. Ashleigh says, I did a similar thing, 1 Tic Tac a day for I think it was 2 weeks. What is with our fucking society, guys? Ugh. And what kills me is I was literally eating no food, and everyone told me how healthy and great I looked. I was starving to death, and they claimed I was healthy. What you look like has nothing to do with your health, okay? Can we just anyway. So this is when Daniel gets the visit from Achadi. And Achadi says the thing that I think is very much a summary of how he sees Daniel also. They're talking about why Lorkin won't say anything. What's he hiding? Do they think it's like a test somehow about Lorkin's loyalty to the traitors or to Cerelia? Or maybe it's a test of the king of Sachaka. And, there's all kinds of theories. And then in the end, Daniel says the Allied lands will view the reading of Lorkin's mind as an act of aggression. But hardly something to go to war over, Achadi replied. Sachaka has prospered for centuries without trade with the lands to the west, thanks to our links with the lands over the eastern sea. Without training for all in higher magic, your magicians are hardly a threat. We don't need you. We don't fear you. You were only ever an opportunity we wanted to explore. And I was just like, Daniel, baby, do you not hear that? That is brutally honest, and I respect the hell out of him for just saying that shit, because that's how it's felt to me this whole time. Cerelians not wanting to learn black magic is just too big a disadvantage. I understand that somebody was out there able to just murder hundreds of people and become a maniac with it, but I just don't see one lunatic being evidence of how this would work if you just taught people and kept an eye on everybody's overall behavior. It just drives me bonkers that they are still so anti-black magic. Just get over it. Get over it. Get over it. Holy shit. So, let's see. Oh, right. We have, Sania, and she is preparing to leave. She still hasn't chosen, she's chosen her assistant, but she hasn't said who it is. And I can't figure it out. I've been trying to think who she would even ask, and I really don't know. I'm just, So she comes in, and I like that Lillia's struggling with warrior studies. She's really not good at it. And I love that Lillia's like, I warned Callan that I wasn't good at it. And he acted like he knew what I meant. But then he saw me and was like, oh, you're really not good at it. And I was like, bitch, I said. And Sania shares with her, yeah, I wasn't good at it either, actually. It was my weakest subject until somebody, like, personally tutored me in it and was able to sense what my problems were. And Lillia has a moment of being like, oh my God, who taught you? Let me talk to them. And she's like, they're dead. They died in that whole war, you know. But it turns out that person had a student who is still alive. So they're going to see if she can maybe talk to him and get some, or her, I think it's a woman who was the student, who's going to teach Lillia based on some of the principles that Sania learned. And yeah, that's pretty much most of that conversation. Sania's also checking to see that Lily is not being like bullied by any of the other students. And let's see. Another moment of her noticing how, I gotta tell you guys, this one is really starting to get to me. And I don't know if it's like, if it's just me, tell me if it's just me, but the description of how everybody reacts to the black robes of a black magician is so tiresome at this point. Every time Sania steps foot outside, we have to hear about the way that her robes make her stand out, the way people turn and look at her, the way that there's fear in their eyes or they take a step away, the way that she remembers how it was with Acheron and how everybody, it's just over and over and over again. And there really comes a point for me, I don't even believe it anymore. Like, I could see being like generally intimidated, but I don't really feel that people are going to react to her and Callan with this intensity of fear or intimidation after all this time. And maybe that's me, you know. If anything, in some ways, based on what I have seen of humanity, I would think there would be a lot of people trying to ingratiate themselves. There's this sort of like honorable, like, oh, I don't want to associate with somebody who could potentially just murder a bunch of people, that the author assumes of the majority of students and other faculty. But the truth is, when somebody's got access to a power source that's kind of like not used by many people, and that's extremely devastating and really overpowered in a lot of ways, that person often has to fend off more like advances from people attempting to create a friendship or people trying to become their protege than otherwise. So the fact that everybody's just constantly afraid, I just don't really think that's how people work most of the time. Even when something like bad happens to someone, if it's not due to their own power, there is a certain like weird reflected like grotesque glamour that can come with it. You know, like if let's say somebody is going to school and like one of their family members was brutally murdered. People still have like this draw to somebody like that where they're like wanting to know the gory details and ask about like the gossip surrounding what happened. It's just, that's how people are gross. So I just, it's been 2 decades now. I just don't think people would still have this reaction. And the fact that the author repeats this reaction so frequently, it makes me push back mentally even more and be like, nah, I don't buy it. I don't think I would have that reaction if it weren't being drilled into my head so much. But there's this perverse, defiant part of me that you tell me something super true and I'm like, no, it's not. So she goes into this meeting with the administrator and the king's advisor, and they explain to her they tell her about how her son was put in prison, and that is worrisome and it sucks. However, they were going to try and send her to S'chaka without a good story as to why she was going. And now they've got the perfect excuse. So they're going to send her and make it as if she's arriving on behalf of Cerelia to represent the guild in this matter. And I really wonder if she's going to be allowed to see Lorkin at all or what. I'm just super curious about how they're going to handle her arrival there and what good would she be able to do. Like, we know that she's actually there to facilitate conversation between Cerelia and the traitors. But what will it look like on the Lorkin front? Because obviously that's what she's there to do regarding the guild. But this is Sania's son. She's going to want to see him and she's going to want to help him. I don't have any sense of what she'll be allowed and not. So I guess we'll see. And also I like the fact that when they're talking about like ways that she can sort of lean on the S'chakans, they recognize they're very realistic about the fact that the S'chakans don't need or fear us. And the only leverage they have at all really is that our trade is profitable for us both. And they're going to be missing out on some lucrative opportunities if they decide to shut shit down with us. And she's sort of like, can I also mention the fact that if they don't play ball, we might go and trade with the traitors instead? And I think it's Osen who's just like, no, that is just more of a threat. The idea that we would even be in a position to do that would give them some information. Do not mention that. And let's see. Oh, right. I forgot that, the king and the advisor, there's a blood ring that's in use between the two of them. So they're communicating immediately, even though the king is not present, which I was sort of like, well, why don't you just come around, king? Why don't you just like arrive here and, actually take this meeting? But, yeah, she asks, the king asks, can the traitors be contacted? Can they do anything to help us? And Balkan says, we can try. Daniel's assistant, Lady Maria, has established a way to send a message to the traitors. Sania should leave a blood ring of hers here. Should she carry a blood ring from one of us as well? And it didn't occur to me. I think the advisor is like, if somebody mind reads her, they're going to be able to get information about how to use black magic, and we're supposed to be protecting that information pretty closely. And Osen says she could wear Naki's ring, which will keep them from being able to access anything that she doesn't want them to. And I was like, oh, that's a cool, like, fail-safe. Because that was the main thing with those blood rings, is I was like, it's a neat conversational device, but you don't really get to choose what transmits. It's anything that crosses your mind, they can sort of see, evidently. And that just seems really like too much. But if you could balance it with one of these other items to keep certain things secured, that would make it much, much more doable. You know, it's like the idea of like, if you sent somebody a text message, they got access to your entire like photo folder, you know, and it's just like, no, absolutely fucking not. So, I'm trying to find the, okay, yeah, they tell her that she's going to be leaving tomorrow and that she needs to go and meet with her assistant. Again, I don't know who that is. And, they talk about Lillia and her not being a great warrior. And then at the last part of this chapter, Lillia is, talking to, well, she doesn't, I say talking to, it's just he gives so little back that it doesn't feel like it. It feels like she's just reporting to a computer. But she's talking to Callan, and she tells him about how Cery's, you know, basically been found out and he's in hiding. And she notices this sort of like look to Callan, and she's wondering what the hell his deal is. And then she realizes that it looks familiar, and it's the expression that Naki would get right before she insisted that they go and burn some rowet. And she realizes that she smelt it on his robes before, and all of a sudden she puts it together. oh, he's an addict and he's fiending right now. And she wonders to herself why it didn't stick like that for her. And she doesn't crave it the same way he craves it, or that Naki seemed to crave it. And just kind of winds up with the assumption, I think I'm just lucky. And I wish so much that people who don't deal with addiction could understand that. The privilege of not being born with whatever it is that causes the disease of addiction to be so much more difficult to overcome in certain people. It's just luck, as so many things are, but we don't want to admit that. We hate the concept of luck, a lot of us. We just want to be able to control everything. So that's the end of that section. So I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again, Ashleigh, very much for commissioning this, and I'm glad that you were able to come hang out in this chat, and thank you, Martin, as well. And I will be seeing y'all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.